Did you know the name Lilith survived 3 major transformations across history? First as a night spirit in Mesopotamia, then as a warning symbol used to police the edges of society, and finally as an initiatory key in modern occultism? Every time a culture tried to bury her, the name returned with new meaning. So the real question is not only who was Lilith, it is why did so many traditions need her to exist, and what do you gain when you understand her the way magicians and mystics have? Understood her? To find the beginning, we go back before the Bible, into Sumer and Akkad, where night was not just darkness, but territory. There you meet terms like Lilu and Lilitu, often linked to spirits of air, night and liminality. The threshold between waking and dreaming, desire and fear, village and wilderness. This matters because Lilith does not start as a neat goddess with a single myth. She starts as a category of the nocturnal. What moves unseen, what touches the psyche through. Sleep, sexuality, and the fragile boundary of the body. And in that same world stands Inanna, later Ishtar, one of the clearest portraits of sacred sovereignty we have from antiquity. Erotic power, warlike intensity, and the descent into the underworld. Inanna's myths orbit thresholds, birth and death, pleasure and terror, order and the wild. There is a Sumerian story about a sacred tree associated with Inanna, often called the Hulupu tree. Some modern readers try to tie a figure in that narrative to Lilith like imagery, but the scholarly debate is real, and I think it is wiser to be precise. The text has terms that are interpreted differently. What is solid, historically, is the symbolic ecosystem. Inanna's domain includes the very liminal zones where Lil spirits make sense. Night wind, dream, erotic edge, the underworld door. As names travel across cultures, sacred power travels by translation. Inanna becomes Ishtar in Babylonian settings, and traits and titles spread through the Near East. In coastal Canaan and Phoenician currents, Astarte rises as a major goddess of love and power, resonating with the broader Ishtar complex. A historian keeps these identities distinct. An occultist notices the repeating pattern, sovereignty plus desire plus threshold work. Then comes the turning point. Later monotheistic worlds reshape the spiritual map. Older liminal forces do not always vanish. They get recoded. In the Hebrew tradition, Lilith appears in Isaiah 34:14 in a passage of desolation and night creatures, sometimes translated as a night creature, sometimes named directly. Either way, Lilith becomes linked to the night side of disorder. Folklore and protective practices cluster around her, fears around childbirth, infant vulnerability, and erotic dreams that feel invasive. Strip away the sensationalism and you can see the social function. Lilith becomes a symbol for what resists control, especially autonomy, sexuality, and the unpredictable cost of repressing them. By the medieval period, Lilith becomes biography. In the Alphabet of Ben Sira, often described as satirical or folkloric, she is cast as Adam's first partner, refusing submission and leaving. The scandal is not only sexual, it is hierarchical. She will not accept being reduced. Whether you read it as myth, polemic, or mirror, it births the modern archetype, Lilith as the one who walks out. And then Jewish mysticism systematizes her. In Kabbalistic streams around the Zohar, Lilith can appear as a queen of the night side, sometimes paired with Samael within a cosmology of oppositions, alignment and distortion, holiness and its shadow. Gershom Scholem, mapping Kabbalah's development, shows these figures are not random monsters. They become part of a metaphysical grammar. Raphael Patai, exploring the feminine in Hebrew imagination, highlights how feminine power can be split into radiant and terrifying forms depending on theology and social pressure. So Lilith becomes more than a boogeyman. She becomes a principle, shadow, desire, autonomy, and the danger of what refuses domestication. Here is where ceremonial magic quietly changes the conversation. Once a figure becomes a principle, it can be worked with, not as horror movie theater and not as blind devotion, but as a disciplined relationship with meaning. High magic at its best is structured dialogue with symbols, ritual as a technology of attention, boundary, and transformation. That is why Lilith survives. She is a mirror too useful to discard. And this is also why secret societies and initiatory orders benefit from her symbolism. Closed fraternities thrive on symbols that separate the merely curious from the committed. Lilith functions as a gate. She provokes projection, and training turns projection into knowledge. In plain terms, she is a test of maturity, ethics, and inner honesty. The story crosses another bridge in Europe: demonization and renaming. In Christian demonologies and Renaissance grimoires, rival deities are often recast as infernal powers. This is one path by which Astarte echoes into Astaroth, a figure in later grimoire hierarchies and Gothic catalogues. Historically, Astaroth is not literally Astarte, but the pattern is clear. A divine name becomes a demon label under a new regime. Again, two layers exist at once: cultural conversion for historians, persistent archetype for occultists. So how do Lilith, Inanna, and Astaroth relate in practical occult? Language? Think in currents. Inanna, or Ishtar, is the sovereignty current, love and war, descent and return, the power that makes you whole by taking you through the underworld and back. Astarte, or Astaroth, is a current of desire and knowledge that survives through both goddess and grimoire mask. Lilith is the liminal current, the night side of autonomy, the shadow that shows where you are not free. Different temples, different names, similar inner work, confronting where you trade truth for acceptance. Quick pause, because this is where your experience matters. When you hear Lilith, what image rises first? Demon, goddess, rebellion, or shadow work? Comment it. Not to label yourself, but because your first association is a map of what the symbol touches in you. From the 19th and 20th centuries onward, occult revivals reframe these figures through Hermetic Kabbalah and ceremonial structure. Lilith is often placed near the shadow side of the tree of life, the Qliphoth, as an emblem of raw or distorted power. Scholars like Moshe Edel emphasize how creative and diverse Jewish mystical thought really is, while modern occult writers, Kenneth Grant is a famous example, push Lilith into darker, more erotic, and more transgressive forms of gnosis. You do not have to accept every claim to recognize the function. Lilith becomes an initiatory confrontation with taboo, desire, and the night mind. Modernity adds yet another layer. Astrology's Black Moon Lilith, not a physical body, but a calculated lunar point used to speak about rejection, desire, and untamed independence. Psychological, spiritual, or both, the continuity remains. Lilith is a language for what the polite self would rather not admit. Now, practice without fantasy. Experienced practitioners start with ethics and boundaries. They cleanse, ground, and close a working carefully, not because the world is a haunted house, but because ritual is about containment. And instead of asking, "How do I summon Lilith?" a mature magician asks, "What part of my sovereignty is exiled? Where do I betray myself? Where does desire control me instead of informing me?" The work might be as simple and as difficult as a focused ritual, a chosen symbol, an honest invocation framed as dialogue with the archetype, and a journal that tracks dreams, triggers, and patterns. Without integration, there is no initiation, only intoxication. Here is a grounded example. Someone notices a repeating pattern in relationships, intense attraction followed by self-erasure. They choose a Lilith working as shadow integration. Over weeks, they track dreams, emotional spikes, moments where they silence themselves to keep peace. The result is not fireworks, it is clarity, and a new boundary. If they pivot to Inanna, the emphasis becomes descent and return, what must be surrendered, what must be reclaimed. If they work within a egotic framework associated with Astaroth, the emphasis becomes disciplined. Engagement with desire and knowledge, always with limits, accountability, and aftercare. In all three, the goal is not power over others, it is sovereignty over the self. I will be personal for a moment. When I first understood Lilith as a mirror rather than a monster, I felt relieved and exposed. Relieved because the myth became usable. Exposed because it made it hard to pretend I did not know where my own chains were. And in my opinion, that is why Lilith stays dangerous. Not because she jumps out of the dark, but because she makes you face what you have avoided in daylight. Now we can close the loop from the beginning. Why does Lilith keep returning? Because she is the pressure test of a civilization. Whenever a culture becomes obsessed with control, of women, of desire, of nature, of the night, Lilith appears as the counter symbol. What is repressed does not vanish, it mutates. In one era, she is a wind spirit at the village edge. In another, a cautionary tale. In another, a queen of the night side in mystical cosmology. In ours, she becomes a language of shadow and autonomy in psychology, astrology, and ceremonial practice. Different masks, same function. She reveals where freedom was traded for comfort. So here's the second question, and I really want your answer. For the next video, do you want a deeper dive into the historical texts and dates, or a deeper dive into safe ceremonial frameworks and correspondences? Comment history or practice, and add one. Tradition you want connected, Kabbalah, Mesopotamia, Goetia, or modern astrology. And the promised payoff, the benefit of understanding Lilith correctly, is simple and unsettling. You stop confusing repression with virtue and desire with destiny. You learn how symbols are weaponized against people, and how those same symbols can be reclaimed as tools of integration. If you keep your feet on the ground while your mind explores the night, Lilith does not have to be a demon or an idol. She can be what she has always been at her deepest level, the threshold where you either return to your own sovereignty or you do not.